Superhero movies these last few years are all about the multiverse. The current period of fascination with this concept began a few years ago with the brilliant animated film Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which centers on Miles Morales becoming Spider-Man and also discovering that there are countless other spider-powered superheroes who exist in parallel universes. Since then, the live-action Marvel Cinematic Universe has made the multiverse the focal points, I guess, of the current phase of its overall narrative, with last year's Spider-Man No Way Home and the upcoming Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness both featuring the concept. Next year, DC Comics' answer to the MCU, the DC Extended Universe, is getting into the multiverse act with the first big-screen adventure of The Flash, which will be loosely based on the Flashpoint story from the comics and feature the DCEU's version of the Flash traversing the multiverse and encountering variants of heroes he knows from his world, including apparently the version of Batman introduced in Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film, played once again by Michael Keaton. It might seem like DC is chasing Marvel here, rolling out its own cinematic multiverse a few years after the competition, and in a sense it is. Marvel got there first as far as the movies are concerned, but if you turn back enough pages of comic book history, you'll find that DC Comics kind of came up with this multiverse gimmick. In 1956, DC introduced a new version of one of its original Golden Age characters, the Flash. This version of the Flash, real name Barry Allen, was created by writer Robert Kanigher and artist Carmine Infantino. When Barry Allen is struck by lightning and imbued with speedster powers, he decides to become a superhero, taking inspiration from his favorite childhood comic book character, the Golden Age version of The Flash. 5 years later, in The Flash number 123, Barry Allen meets Jay Garrick, the Golden Age Flash, in the flesh. It turns out Jay is from Earth in a parallel universe. This parallel world, referred to as Earth 2, is eventually retroactively established as the setting of the adventures of all of DC's Golden Age heroes. It's really the perfect Silver Age concept, if you think about it. It's a needlessly overcomplicated solution to a problem that existed barely, if at all. It really wasn't that complicated at first. The Golden Age Flash and the Silver Age Flash were depicted as being completely different people, so establishing that the Golden Age Flash had actually lived on a parallel Earth was no big deal. But when DC's editors declared that all of their Golden Age heroes lived on Earth 2, while their Silver Age counterparts lived on Earth 1, that was a slightly different deal. See, DC's characters that had been published continuously since their introduction in the Golden Age, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, were not obviously different people in the 1950s and 60s than they were in the 1930s and 40s. And since the Earth 1, Earth 2 separation had been decided years after the fact, it's not like there had been any kind of acknowledgement in the comics themselves that any kind of change had taken place, because at the time those comics were created, no change had taken place. So, after Earth 1 was established as the setting of the Silver Age comics and Earth 2 as the setting of the Golden Age, some comics fans couldn't help but wonder where the dividing line was. For example, Batman. The series is about him, after all. Don't worry, I didn't forget. When was the final regular monthly appearance of the Earth 2 Batman, and when was the first regular monthly appearance of the Earth 1 Batman? Given the circumstances that led to the creation of the Earth 1, Earth 2 division, and the fact that the people attempting to answer these questions are comic book nerds, opinions vary. The most obvious point at which the Earth 1 Batman takes over the monthly titles is with the publication of Detective Comics number 327. This was the first Batman comic released under the tenure of executive editor Julius Schwartz, who had overseen the introduction of the Silver Age Flash and come up with the concept of the Earth 1 and Earth 2 division in the first place. Given that establishing the Silver Age DC heroes as living on Earth 1 was Schwartz's idea, it makes sense to assume that the Batman stories produced under his stewardship are set on Earth 1. There's more than just the editorial change to suggest Detective Comics number 327 as the transition point. There are noticeable differences on the page as well. The most immediately apparent of these differences is the debut of Batman's new look. When it's referenced by modern fans and critics, the new look is often reduced to they added a yellow oval to the symbol on Batman's chest, which, yeah, they definitely did that, but they also did more than that. Compare the overall art style of the Batman story that leads Detective Comics number 327, penciled by Carmine Infantino and inked by Joe Giella, to the Batman feature from the previous issue, Detective Comics 326, penciled by Sheldon Moldoff and inked by Charles Paris. The differences run a lot deeper than a yellow oval on Batman's chest. Moldoff and Paris's work is in the classic style of the early Silver Age. Bright, theatrically posed cartoon figures, even lighting, clean, simple, boxy page layouts. Infantino and Giella, on the other hand, draw more naturalistic, less cartooned figures. Their panels are dramatically lit with heavy shadows and bold angles, and their page layouts are more abstract, employing panels without borders and of a wider variety of shapes. There's nothing in the world wrong with Moldoff and Paris's style. I love it, actually, but it's the work of artists like Infantino and Giella that would come to define the look of Batman in the comics in the 1960s and set the table for an even more striking stylistic evolution to follow in the works of Neil Adams, Irv Novick, and Dick Giordano. There's also a pretty drastic change in the tone of the stories from Detective Comics 326 to 327. The Batman story in Detective Comics 326, written by Dave Wood, is titled Captives of the Alien Zoo, and follows Batman and Robin as they are abducted by little green aliens and, as you have no doubt surmised from the title, taken to a zoo on the aliens' home planet. At first, they're forced to perform like circus animals for the amusement of the aliens, but eventually they escape and succeed in convincing some of the aliens that they are thinking beings. Ultimately, Batman and Robin are allowed to return to Earth after teaming up with the alien police to foil a criminal scheme masterminded by the zoo owner, of course. You could not ask for a more delightfully typical Silver Age Batman story. It is outlandish, casually bizarre, and a hell of a lot of fun. Contrast that with The Mystery of the Menacing Mask, the Batman feature from Detective Comics number 327, written by John Broome. In this story, Batman and Robin face off against Frank Fenton, a crook with the seemingly miraculous ability to freeze the dynamic duo in their tracks whenever they come near him. It's far-fetched, but not abducted to an alien zoo. Far-fetched. Plus, there is a scientific explanation for Fenton's ability. It bears little to no resemblance to actual science, but again, it's a lot more grounded than Little Green Men from Outer Space. There's also a subplot involving an effort to save an historic neighborhood of Gotham City from demolition, which feels especially down to earth compared to the previous month's story. Now, shifts in style and tone are not evidence that the stories being told necessarily take place in another universe. Comic books change creative teams all the time, and while a new writer or artist may interpret the world of the characters in their own way, we as the readers accept that it is still the same world as the one the previous creators were depicting. And in this case, the previous artists, Moldoff and Paris, did continue drawing Batman with Julius Schwartz as editor. They became the regular artists on the Batman monthly title, although they did adjust their style somewhat to move a bit closer to what Infantino and Giella were doing over in Detective Comics. I don't mention the new look because I think it's definitive proof that the Batman comics switched settings from Earth 2 to Earth 1. I mention it as an example of the changes made by Julius Schwartz when he took over as editor of Batman. Schwartz came in and put his vision into practice. We know from his work on The Flash that his vision included the idea that the Golden Age DC heroes existed on Earth 2, and the then current Silver Age heroes existed on Earth 1, so it's only logical to assume that once he assumed creative control of the Batman books, the Batman they featured was the Earth 1 version. But while the start of Julius Schwartz's run as editor of the Batman books is, in my opinion, the most obvious candidate for the transition point from Earth 2 Batman to Earth 1 Batman, it's not the only candidate. Another possibility floated by fans who give a shit about this is Superman number 76, which was published 12 years earlier in 1952. Superman 76 was not edited by Julie Schwartz and actually predates Schwartz's proposal of the concept of Earth 1 and Earth 2 by several years, and yet, despite the fact that no one involved in the creation of this issue could possibly have had Earth 1 or Earth 2 in mind at the time, Superman 76 is considered a candidate for the first appearance of the Earth 1 Batman because its lead story, The Mightiest Team in the World, written by Edmund Hamilton and drawn by Curt Swan with inkers Stan Kay and John Fischetti, tells the tale of the first face-to-face meeting of Superman and Batman. The story begins with Batman and Robin deciding to take a vacation, which they can afford to do because they just caught the last criminal in Gotham City. Well, the last criminal the cops give a shit about catching anyway. Commissioner Gordon even says so. So Dick Grayson decides to visit relatives upstate, and Bruce Wayne goes on a cruise because even in the sunny, optimistic Golden Age, Batman and Robin were self-flagellating masochists. And they're not the only ones. By an astonishing coincidence, one of the other passengers with Bruce aboard that cruise ship is Clark Kent, who has also decided to take a cruise for his vacation because I guess he's an emotionally broken person who believes he deserves only suffering too. But that's not the most astonishing part. Oh, sure, the odds against Superman and Batman in their civilian identities just so happening to book themselves as passengers on the very same cruise must be so astronomical as to beggar belief when such a thing actually occurs. But, my friends, what if I were to tell you that Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne are not only passengers aboard the same cruise ship, but that, owing to how crowded the ship is with self-hating vacationers, Clark and Bruce find themselves having to share a cabin. Superman and Batman, roommates, both ignorant of the other's heroic identity, both weighed down by the same question, what if he discovers who I really am? How delicious. I bet some of you have wondered about the first time Superman met Batman, but how many of you imagined it would be written as a farce? Because I didn't. I hoped it would be, sure, but I dared not imagine. Anyway, the ship hasn't even left the dock yet when a jewel thief stages a fire as a distraction while he steals some diamonds. Clark and Bruce hear that there's trouble and change into Superman and Batman in their darkened cabin, but when they see each other in costume lit by the glow of the fire outside, they figure out what's going on. Clark Kent, you're Superman. Bruce Wayne, you're Batman. No time to discuss this now. We gotta do something about that fire. So they rush outside. Superman puts out the fire while Batman rescues Lois Lane, who is trapped behind a wall of flames because of course she is. Then they scour the docks for the jewel thief, but find nothing. Batman reasons that the thief must have gone aboard the cruise ship, because what better way could there be to get away with a crime than to corner yourself on a boat filled with people? Worried that it might threaten their secret identities if Batman and Superman just suddenly show up on the same ship as Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent, Bats and Soups board the ship in costume, announcing to the captain that they've come to search for the jewel thief. The captain is thrilled to have them along for the trip and even gives them his own personal cabin to stay in. Also coming along is Lois, who has snatched up a room vacated by someone who canceled after being upset by the fire and who is determined that if Superman and Batman are going to catch a diamond thief on a cruise ship, nobody other than her is going to get that story. Lois being on the ship complicates things even further for Superman and Batman, who now have to guard their secret identities from her, as well as from the rest of these spiritually numb dead-enders who willingly booked themselves to be passengers on a cruise ship. So, to throw Lois off the trail, and because it wouldn't be a 1950s Superman comic without Superman masterminding a mean-spirited gaslighting of Lois Lane, Superman tells Batman to pretend he's falling for Lois. Superman will, in turn, pretend to be jealous, and that should be enough to distract Lois while they hunt down the jewel thief. But Lois overhears Superman pitching this plan to Batman and decides to teach Superman a lesson by acting like she has the hots for Batman. Serves you right, jerk-ass post-war Superman. She even invites Batman to a dance, where he entertains the other passengers with some acrobatics. Superman joins in the act as well, juggling some icebergs, but Lois yawns and acts unimpressed. By the way, juggling icebergs on a passenger ship seems in poor taste. Like, you wouldn't juggle 767s on the 93rd floor of a skyscraper, would you? Come on, have a little respect. Anyway, Superman has searched the entire ship with his X-ray vision and found no sign of the stolen diamonds, but he did turn up a suspect. This dude, who is carrying a concealed pistol. Batman chats him up a bit later. His name is John Smilter, and he claims to be a high-tension electrical engineer with a job on the ship, but Batman knows that's bullshit because this Smilter guy is wearing leather-soled shoes, and high-tension electrical engineers always wear rubber-soled shoes. They can't prove it, but they're sure Smilter is their man. And they're right. Of course, Smilter has a plan to be picked up in a helicopter, and to be sure he gets away clean, he sabotages the ship to ensure Superman and Batman are busy, and takes Lois as a hostage. The ship is dead in the water, and there's a storm coming, so Superman decides to stay behind to tow the ship to safety, but they don't want to just let Smilter go, so Superman throws Batman at Smilter's helicopter. Batman takes out Smilter and rescues Lois, and later, with the ship safely in port and Smilter in police custody, Batman also reveals the secret of the missing diamonds. Smilter concealed them inside the bullets of his gun. That's why Superman couldn't see them with his X-ray vision. They were hidden by the lead. That night, the cruise ship heads home, and Superman and Batman engage in one last round of wacky hijinks to ensure their secret identities remain intact. First, Supes flies Batman to Gotham City so he can make a quick appearance before returning to the ship to make another appearance as Bruce Wayne, thus proving to Lois that they must be different people. Then, Supes flies ahead to meet the ship when it arrives home, while Bruce disguises himself as Clark and disembarks alongside Lois. Their secret identity safe, Superman and Batman discuss the only mystery that remains. Who does Lois like more? Batman suggests that they both ask Lois out to dinner and see who she goes with. That'll settle it. But before they can ask, they see Lois heading out on her dinner date with Robin. Isn't he supposed to be like 13 at this point? Is that okay? I know it's the 50s, but is that okay? So why do some people think this is the first appearance of the Earth 1 Batman? Because it's about Superman and Batman meeting for the first time. But the thing is, Superman and Batman had already met. In All-Star Comics number 7, published in 1941, they appeared together alongside the members of the Justice Society of America, and they seemed to already know each other. So, if they knew each other already, how could they be meeting each other for the first time in the pages of Superman number 76? Answer: because they're imaginary people, and the writer of this story either didn't know they'd met in earlier stories or decided to ignore it for the sake of his own story. That's probably what people who noticed the inconsistency assumed at the time, because Earth 1 and Earth 2 weren't things yet. But years later, after Earth 1 and Earth 2 were established and comics nerds started trolling back issues, searching for clues as to when the changeover from Earth 2 to Earth 1 happened, meaningless discrepancies like this one became evidence. Why do Superman and Batman act like they've never met each other before in Superman number 76? Because the Superman and Batman who knew each other in the early 40s existed on Earth 2, and the Superman and Batman seen in Superman number 76 exist on Earth 1. Maybe. Maybe not. There are other candidates. For example, there's Detective Comics number 225, published in 1955. The lead story of this issue, If I Were Batman, written by Edmund Hamilton and drawn by Sheldon Moldoff and Charles Paris, begins with Batman and Robin capturing a just-indicted crook, John Larrow, as he attempts to escape from the courthouse. After Larrow's capture, Batman announces that he's leaving town for a few days to give a criminology lecture at a convention on the West Coast. With Batman leaving town, a reporter proposes a contest to be sponsored by his paper, Batman for a Day. People who want to know what it's like to be Batman can make a contribution to the Gotham City Police Department's Widows and Orphans Fund, and the biggest donors get to put on a Batman costume and fight crime alongside Robin for one day. Because it's the 50s, Batman and Robin agree to this insane scheme, as long as the contest winners agree to follow Robin's orders and avoid any real danger. Batman leaves town, and Robin sets up shop in a recreation of the Batcave that's been created in an underground parking garage so that contest winners won't have to be taken to the real Batcave. While Robin chaperones the contest winners, who include an initially mousy but surprisingly fearless accountant and a publicity-chasing movie star whose ineptitude leads to a factory catching fire, John Larrow's gang plots to take advantage of the real Batman's absence and break Larrow out of prison. Fed up after a night on patrol with another contest winner, Commissioner Gordon himself this time, who is eager but a bit too old and out of shape for caped crusading, Robin summons the real Batman back to Gotham. With the Batman for a Day contest not yet over, Batman concocts a scheme to allow him to resume his duties ahead of schedule. He donates to the Widows and Orphans Fund as Bruce Wayne and wins the right to be Batman for a day on the final day of the contest. Because the press is watching, he has to be careful not to blow his secret identity, which leads to a few fun panels where we get to see Batman playing wealthy rake Bruce Wayne playing Batman. He has Alfred drive the Batmobile and loudly complains to Robin about how hard it is to climb a rope. They catch Larrow's gang attempting to tunnel into the prison from a phony construction site, and after the crooks have been rounded up, Commissioner Gordon says to Bruce, "Take off that costume, you're a nice young chap, but as Batman, you're just hopelessly miscast." Which is hilarious because, well, you know. So, this is a charming but fairly typical Batman story from this time period. Why do some people think of it as a dividing line between Earth 2 and Earth 1? Well, it doesn't actually have anything to do with that Batman story. I just thought it was cute and wanted to tell you about it. The really important part of Detective Comics number 225 for Earth 2, Earth 1 disambiguation purposes isn't the lead story, but the last story. It's titled The Strange Experiment of Dr. Erdell, and it's the first appearance of John Jones, the Martian Manhunter. This is significant because there is no Golden Age John Jones. He is a product of the Silver Age. In fact, while the first appearance of the Barry Allen version of The Flash in Showcase number 4, which was published almost a year after Detective Comics number 225, is usually said to mark the start of the Silver Age, there is a case to be made that the Silver Age actually begins with the introduction of the Martian Manhunter. Remember, one of the defining characteristics of the Silver Age is how far stories from that era leaned into sci-fi, especially in the early years. And Martian Manhunter, a shape-shifting alien with a secret identity as a police detective, certainly fits the bill as a superhero with sci-fi leanings. Plus, the most important DC Comics superhero team of the Silver Age was the Justice League, which was introduced a little over 4 years later, and of which the Martian Manhunter was a founding member. So, if Martian Manhunter's debut marks the start of the Silver Age, it stands to reason that the Batman featured in the same issue is the Silver Age Batman, meaning he is also the Earth 1 Batman. Good work, Detective Jones. I'd say this case is closed. Or not. There's no way to know for sure when the adventures of the Earth 2 Batman ended and were replaced by those of the Earth 1 Batman, because any attempt to pinpoint exactly when that transition happened is an act of modern reinterpretation. The conceit that Golden Age heroes lived in a separate universe from Silver Age heroes did not exist until the early 60s. Up until then, the writers of the various DC Comics characters assumed that they all existed in the same universe. But it was a fairly loose continuity they shared. They could team up or guest star in each other's titles without someone having to travel through an interdimensional portal or something, but for the most part, creative teams focused on telling their own stories and didn't worry too much about maintaining perfect continuity with everyone else's books. That's why it's called the Golden Age. Well, that's why I call it that. Anyway, we're not talking about actual human history here. We're talking about the fictional histories of made-up people with superpowers. The only reason to have discussions like this, subjecting these 60 and 70-year-old comic book stories to this sort of close analysis, parsing these fine details, is because it's fun. And it's an opportunity to talk about some of these strange and wonderful tales from the Golden and Silver Ages. There are other possibilities for when the Earth 2 to Earth 1 changeover took place in the Batman titles. Many fans of Batman stories from this era have their own headcanons about this. Hell, I've got my pet theory. In fact, I'm pretty sure I have identified exactly when the switch from one universe to another takes place. Here, I'll show you. First, look at this scene, a verbatim reenactment of the ending of the Batman story from Imaginary Comics number 5I.
Well, Robin, now that we've foiled Two-Face's plot to rob the Second National Bank of 2 tons of $2 bills, I'd say we've earned a vacation. Where are you going to go?
I think I'll spend some time upstate with my Aunt Clara. How about you?
I've been invited to be the keynote speaker at the Criminology Convention in Pacific City. That should be fun.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, see you next week. Now compare that with this scene, which is a reenactment of the beginning of the Batman feature from Imaginary Comics number 6I. Hi, Batman. How was the key party in Coast City?
Eye-opening and deeply gratifying. How was your stay with Aunt Harriet?
Fine.
Glad to hear it, chum, but unfortunately we don't have time to stand around and swap vacation stories. I just got off the phone with Commissioner Gordon a moment ago, and the word on the street is that Two-Face is planning to rob 2 tons of $2 bills from the Second National Bank.
Gosh, he's never done that before. We've got to stop him.
To the Batmobile.
Did you spot the telling inconsistency that marks these stories as taking place in 2 different universes? That's right. In the second story, Batman has a tiny bat-shaped birthmark just off the corner of his mouth, clearly identifying him as the Earth 1 Batman. It couldn't be more obvious. Like I said, the whole point of this conversation is to have fun talking about some wonderfully goofy old comic book stories. The truth is, it doesn't matter where a Batman lives. Earth 2, Earth 12, Earth 32, Earth 89, Earth 1. Hell, it doesn't even matter which Earth 1 he's from. That one, that... Okay, not that one. It mostly doesn't matter where a Batman lives, because as long as he's in the hands of writers and artists who have talent, vision, and a story to tell, there's a chance, when you open up that comic book or start watching that movie or TV show, that you're about to see the best Batman ever.
Did you just have lunch, or... What? You've got a little something. Oh, where? Did I get it?
Still there.
Wait, do you mean my birthmark? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't notice it before. Wait, shouldn't it be your bat mark? Are you making fun of me? Not at all. So, have you always had it? Since I was born, becoming the Batman was my destiny. Neat. You know, I could take care of that for you if you wanted. Don't touch me. I wouldn't need to actually touch you. Leave me alone.